Welcome to Season 3 of the Spotlight series, Don't Just Survive, Thrive. Season 1 was launched to help people through the pandemic by talking to a variety of experts about topics such as psychology, finance, and health. Season 2 focused on more work-related issues, including HR, marketing, and leadership. Now it is time for Season 3. Season 3 is centred on the IT industry, specifically tech startups. There are also career spotlights where I talk to senior IT people about the secrets to their impressive career journeys. My name is Nicola Steel, founder of JJP Talent Solutions, an Australian IT recruitment company. For over 20 years, I've helped tech startups and innovative SMEs to attract, recruit, and retain technical talent. I hope you enjoy listening. I'm delighted to introduce Tony Ryan. Tony is an education futurist, an author of 8 books on innovative thinking and lifelong learning. His latest being The Next Generation. Tony, thank you for joining me on Season 3, Episode 7 of the Spotlight series, Don't Just Survive, Thrive.
Nicola, it's a delight to be with you. Thank you for the invitation. I love your work.
Thank you very much, and I love yours too. Thank you. So, Tony, tell me about yourself, and also, what is an education futurist?
That pretty well is me, Nicola. An education futurist helps education systems to prepare for the future. So I've worked in 12 countries around the world with schools and TAFEs and unis as they plan how to teach for an amazing new world. Interesting time to be doing this as well, I assure you. I'm a teacher. I live for education. I think it's probably the most critical profession on the planet. I think it's going to lead us forward in terms of post-COVID. So I'm just fascinated by where we can go with it.
That's fantastic. And I guess it just, the title tells us what you do, an education futurist. And Tony, your latest book, The Next Generation, Preparing Today's Kids for an Extraordinary Future. Please tell me a little bit more about that book.
Well, again, because I'm into, the future of education, I'm very interested in the future for the kids we've got today. And by the way, I don't think it's as difficult to predict as some people say it is. Of course, some things cannot be predicted. That's very obvious. Funnily enough, some other things can. So, for example, we can create that future to some degree. And so when I came to writing that particular book, I decided to focus in on what we call capabilities. Now, it's probably the fanciest word I'll use in this conversation here, though a capability is much more critical than just a skill. A skill is great and it's something you can do. A capability, though, makes you more capable of coping with whatever's up ahead. So one obvious one is your thinking. Another would be what we call adaptive agility. It means you can turn on a 10-cent piece and you can adjust according to circumstances. Another one would be the old, line of resilience, which is going to be relevant. Another would be entrepreneurship. If I had my wish, it would be that every 14-year-old in Australia, all around the world, in fact, knew how to be an entrepreneur, and in fact, even a social entrepreneur. So, for example, they would set up their own business, often in technology, not always, and then perhaps donate 50% of the proceeds to different charities in their local community. I think then we would have an interesting future up ahead. So in the book, I talked about all sorts of practical ways of, preparing kids for this sort of future that's coming up.
That's fantastic. And I love that idea of 14, 15-year-olds being social entrepreneurs, because obviously it's giving them life and career skills, but also giving back to the community, the environment, etc., etc. So you said resilience, adaptability. What were the other few main capabilities?
The obvious one would be thinking. I'm more and more convinced that your thinking determines your life. And whatever you think about all day long is basically who you are. We have so much possibility in terms of what happens inside those ears of ours. There's a concept called cognitive surplus that has always fascinated me from a technologist in the States called Clay Shirky. And his claim is that we waste most of our intellectual capacity on the planet. And so he talks about the way that we need to, be able to make best use of that rather than just sitting and accepting blindly what someone tells us on a TV station. So I love that, concept of cognitive surplus. And, like a lot of people are a bit worried about the world at the moment, and certainly there are some issues going on. But what will rescue us and take us forward, and it always has, is our amazing energy and capacity to come up with new ideas. We know how to develop the planet to actually make it better for us all the time. And we're going to do it again. So one of the biggest capabilities is thinking. And mind you, I can give you quite a few others. It depends on, how you actually look at a whole thing. So, for example, empathy, of all things, is a big one. Tech skills, are just a reality now. They're as necessary as anything else that you need to learn. An understanding of artificial intelligence. In fact, I would love everyone to be a futurist, not in a fancy sense, but in terms of someone who looks to the world up ahead, works out how we want it to be, and then backward maps to now and starts to steadily put it into place. We can't just rely on governments to do that. We need to do that in local communities, in our online communities as well. Okay, so one of the big capabilities, of course, is your tech capability, your ability to take advantage of all that can be offered in the online world.
Definitely. And I remember when I first met you, it was probably about this time last year at my youngest daughter's primary school. And what I talked about all these capabilities, but what I particularly enjoyed is your optimism for the future. And I know at that particular point in time, we didn't have COVID. But I think, as you say, on a global scale, we'll get past this, and it is exciting times as well. Time to reinvent and look at the future.
Well, Nicola, can I make a really telling point in terms of that one? Anyone who eventually listens to this can probably put themselves on a line all the way from being an arch pessimist to an arch optimist. And can I tell you now that either end of those lines is not a good place to be? A hint here in terms of how we're going to cope with the world up ahead, and it's to be a 90% optimist. In fact, you could call realistic optimist. So don't be a total optimist, otherwise you'll believe anything you hear, which is not a good thing in a fake news society. You need to be able to ascertain the worth of something and the truth to it. However, you don't want to be a total pessimist either, because otherwise you'll just look for the worst, and in fact, you're more likely to create it by convincing yourself that it's going to be out there all the time. In spite of everything that's going on the planet right now, there is so much good that is happening as well. If you search, for example, for something like good news about COVID-19, you will find all these wonderful initiatives being taken up by people everywhere who are doing something about it. And in fact, I'll be interested in 5 years' time to develop some hindsight and look back on how we did approach our attitude to all of this. Rather than looking only just for the worst, we looked at ways of improving society as a result of this. And bluntly, people talk about the new normal, whatever that is. There's most definitely changes coming. And I think a lot of them in the long term will be positive for our kids. So keep looking for the great things that can actually happen as a result of this, as compared to just the initial lousy things at the moment.
Yes, and thank you for clarifying that. I think I probably come across sometimes a little bit overly optimistic. I do have a realist approach as well. I remember you talking about this when I met you last year, about those two opposite ends of the spectrum and how neither of them are ideal. So, Tony, what do you envisage as the future of learning and also the future of work?
Well, they're definitely interrelated. If I'm looking at the future of learning, I can see a society where adults especially are going to be continuous learners for life, which, by the way, is going to lend itself very strongly to the IT world, which will need to give support with that one, because a lot of that learning will not take place in real life situations. The majority of it, even after so-called COVID-19 initiatives, will still take place online. So we're going to be learners for life. Now, there are a couple of reasons for that. In fact, there are thousands, but a couple of the big ones. One is that governments have discovered that when adults are learning continuously, they stay healthier and they live more fulfilling lives, and they also cost society less money, quite bluntly. So governments are discovering that by putting a lot of support into adult learning, especially in Europe, which is probably the leader in this on the planet, they're actually lowering rates of depression and poor health initiatives and a whole lot of other things. So that's one reason why we need to be learners for life. Another, of course, is the rapid changes in work practices and even in just the general concept of work anyway, because it's going to, alter so dramatically. People are going to need to have to relearn. That's not as easy as it sounds for some people. You can hardly, move from, say, a physical labour job to something totally in IT within a couple of months. It can take years. All that notwithstanding, we will have people moving rapidly into new things. And then when you talk about the future of work, well, how long have you got? I'm starting to wonder if we may need to truly rethink what it means to be engaged in work on this planet. So, for example, if we're talking work as being your contribution to society, then there'll always be a lot of work to do. No one will ever be short of work unless they're lazy or they're greedy and don't want to contribute. Charities can always do with further help from someone. So there will always be a lot of work. However, if we're talking paid employment, there are going to be lots of big changes. I cannot see the one job for life lasting. I heard a gerontologist in the States once talking about the 7-year cycle. And his claim is that from about the age of 19 or 20, young ones will just start to learn to live a 7-year cycle where they learn and earn for 6.5 years in one profession, and then they take a retirement for 6 months at the age of 28. And they go off and they, discover the orangutans in Borneo. And then they come back at the age of 29 and they do another job for 7 years or so with the learning and the earning. And then they retire again for 3 months. And they go off and they learn how to do something unusual in Iceland in terms of sculpting ice or something. And then they come back and they keep doing this until they're 92 because they're not going to retire at 65 by the time they get there. So they're already seeing work as much more flexible than perhaps chronologically gifted people who think they need to have one job for life. Just because the older people did doesn't mean the young ones will. We also may not need as much money up ahead because of 3 and 4D printing. Now, there's no guarantees on this, though it's likely that the cost of a lot of products will drop dramatically. So by 2030 or so, we may only be paying a small fraction of what we presently do for a lot of objects, including even houses and apartments. So when that comes through, then we're going to have to rethink what it means to need money to actually purchase something. Because up to a point, work becomes your determinant of how you make money to then buy things that you need. What if you didn't need to buy as many things? So you see, there's a lot of that sort of thing going on. There's also the concept of collaborative capitalism, for want of a better way of putting it. It's where a business, for example, determines that they will pay 20% of their proceeds into local charities in their community to give them support. It's given support in America with taxation systems, not as much in Australia, though it's a big move. So the thing is, there could be so many different ways that we see work up ahead, more as a contribution to society as compared to I have to slave away at it from 9 to 6 just to make enough money to enjoy my weekend. In fact, my wrap up on that one is that 20-year-olds today are looking at their parents and grandparents who all complain about being in their 60s and not having enough superannuation, and they hate their work and they can't stand the boss. And this 20-year-old is looking at these older ones going, I want to be like that when I get to that age? There is no way. So they're actually thinking of alternatives even right now. They'll still buy houses, maybe not quite as much. They'll still invest in things, but they'll do it differently. So there's big things coming with the whole concept of work, including universal basic incomes, which is almost something that's happening in Australia and around the world right now. And it's where people are paid a proportion of their earnings just to keep them coping with society when maybe difficult things happen, like major depressions or, coronaviruses. So even governments that didn't support that concept are now supporting it. So we may have a situation where robots take over the work, except the robots then have to pay taxation for the work they're doing. And that taxation then supports the universal basic incomes. So you see, there's a whole different way of looking at how work could actually take place up ahead.
Wow. Tony, you have completely blown my mind on so many levels. That is incredible. And I think it does look really bright from what you say. And I love the fact that you say that learning, and I've never thought about it this way, but it makes sense, makes you healthier. That 7-year itch, which I kind of get that anyway. When I look back at my life, every 7 years I seem to recreate myself. So it's interesting to see that there's some science behind that as well. And and also a world where money is really very much a means to an end and doesn't hold the importance it does now and in the past. So that's really, really fascinating.
Well, look, a wrap up on that, Nicola. I remember you talking about having two daughters. I would rather them see life as something to be almost inspired by, as compared to being a chore where you have to just get through it so you can have just those little snippets of joy here and there. And in ancient Greek times, they used to talk of a concept called eudemonia, Eudamonia. And eudemonia is the art of full living. And it's where you actually find the time to play with your kids, and you actually go, with the joy of walking through a rainforest and take your time with it, as compared to just always feeling swamped and rushed because of that thing called work. So I would love your daughters to focus more on eudemonia while still engaging in productive work that is good for them and good for society.
That's brilliant. I really like that. And enjoying life, not in a hedonistic kind of a way, but as you say, appreciating and being inspired and everything. And thank you for bringing up my two daughters there. So I've got one that's graduating in 2022. She's in year 10 currently. And the other one she'll be graduating in 2027 from high school, not university. So if they were here, what advice would you give them, and obviously other children, so that they can really flourish in their careers and lives generally?
To some degree, I would prefer them to determine that advice for themselves, because that's the most effective advice you can ever find in life. If I was sitting on my, throne somewhere and carrying on about this sort of stuff, I'd probably go back to being a realistic optimist. Children today are a little bit overwhelmed by the fear-mongering that happens sometimes, especially online. And the whole dynamic of the online world, of course, is that it's the twin horns of a dilemma. It's both the best and the worst thing for us, because it's allowed us to connect with anyone on the planet virtually who we want to, indeed connect with. The other side is, of course, it subjects us to the 1% of people who we probably don't need to hear from. And I have some concern about the messages collectively that are put into children's heads. Keep in mind that you are the sum total of everything you read and everyone you meet. So you need to choose carefully who you spend time with and who you subject your beautiful brain to in terms of reading in different ways. So we need to show children how to, be able to make really responsible choices on what they put inside their heads. So not just read something because someone else said it's worth reading. So that bit about being able to choose like that, I think, is, a really important point. And, maybe, look, if they're going to live a full life, I think that it's been well established that you need to find a fable balance between two groups of people. There are only two groups of people in their lives. The first group is themselves, and the other group is everyone else. Yeah. And I think they need to find a 50-50 balance between them. So if you're 90% yourself, you're a selfish individual who's taking up too much space on the planet. The trouble is, if you're 90% others and only 10% yourself, you eventually burn out. You can't help other people anyway. So you need to find a fable 50-50 balance. So they would be a couple of things that I'd offer to them. Though, look, the world could be extraordinary. It still is. In spite of the horrendous stuff that's happened to a lot of people this year, and most definitely we need to focus on a lot of those things, especially with children, and especially with what we call epigenetics, where their DNA structure to some degree can be changed by going through poverty and miserable experiences. So it's hardly a perfect world. I'm still only a realistic optimist, and I appreciate that some stuff is, pretty awful. The other side is that the world has gradually kept improving for the last, 10,000 years, consistently improving. People living longer, healthier. Nearly all outcomes are improving all the time in terms of health and wealth in so many different ways. So be careful about us just saying it's just going to be awful all the time. So my wrap up to parents on that one is you can't hide children from realities. At the same time, keep encouraging them to look for the inspiring messages from great people, because there are so many of them out there.
That's brilliant. And it's coming back to that thinking capability that you mentioned earlier on.
Oh, Nicola, as I said, back near the start, thinking is your life. Whatever you think about all day long truly is who you are. So we talk about what we call metacognition, and awareness of your own thinking. Then I actually show children how to do that. by, for example, putting a little puppet on their finger, and they talk to the puppet. Like, I'll have 12-year-olds doing this. And after they've talked to the puppet, they then just think to the puppet, and the puppet responds to them, thinking back to them. And then they get rid of the puppet, so they learn how to have a conversation inside their own heads. We all need to know how to do that. So then we can actually find the right problems in life, which, by the way, is more important than finding the right solutions, can you believe? That's another big thing we need to show children. Work out how to solve the right problem. So you have to find the right problem. You don't just run around solving everything, because you can end up solving all the wrong problems. So you need to solve the right issue. Most people solve the wrong problem. That's why hardly anyone ever solves their problems in life. They don't think about what the real issue is. So, for example, I was working with a class of kids once, and they were trying to work out what the real issue was behind cyberbullying. And at first it was that, children just cyberbully. That's the problem. Except they needed to go back and work out what the real issue was. And finally, they realised that the real issue with cyberbullying was parents who had no idea what their kids were doing in their bedrooms at home. And they reasoned that to resolve the issue, they had to focus in on that one, because too many parents let their kids take their technology into their bedroom. Now, if you're listening to this and you've got a 15-year-old at home, it's too late. It's too late, because all hell will break loose if you try and demand that they actually leave it outside from now on. However, at the age of 5, do not let them take it into their rooms. And this is someone who loves technology. Like, I just about have my phones actually connected to me physically. So I live with it as well. I'm telling you what, though, do not do that. Don't let them take it into the room. There needs to be a separation. And kids need to also learn how to not be with it sometimes, like to actually go away to a park for the day without having it with them. Otherwise, it's always setting a wedge up between the family and the other people they're talking with online. So, lots of different things that we need to do there as well.
Yeah, and it is really important. I know with my youngest daughter, who's 10, she gets very upset if she's not near her iPad, which is quite worrying, really, and getting very cross about it. It's like an addiction. But and I guess we need to demonstrate ourselves that don't be permanently attached to your phone.
We do.
I like, for example, I always charge mine in the kitchen at night so that it's not in the bedroom, so it's not the first thing you look at in the morning and what have you.
Yeah, all chargers in the kitchen, no chargers in bedrooms. Otherwise, they can keep them going all night.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously, children watch their parents and see what they're doing. But sorry, coming back to technology, I know that you've got a real interest in AI and robotics. So how do you think they're going to be applied in everyday learning environments?
Well, people love watching sci-fi, which, by the way, is also too negative. And I noticed that Cory Doctorow, who is a very well-known sci-fi writer, has deemed that he will now just write positive stuff. And so too often we talk about robots, for example, being negative and horrendous, and they're going to run down the streets and kill us all. And, I can't absolutely say never, though the vast majority of robots are going to be beneficial for society. They're going to improve our quality of life. In fact, they're going to rescue our children from the drudgery. They will not need to do drudgery unless, of course, they want to do it. So, for example, with learning environments, having a robot teacher, it's a long way off. I'll be surprised, by the way, if I see it within 2 decades, partly because I'm not sure that parents are going to be very happy about a set of values being inculcated into their children by an artificial device. So, I mean, where did that value system come from? Big question. However, we do actually have a lot of support mechanisms, like, for example, personal series. So we're going to have little devices that sit on a child's shoulder, and they'll talk with it all the time, 24 hours a day, and it'll be programmed to understand what they can and can't do. So it'll be voice activated. It'll also be able to see their face at different times. We have 3,000 micro expressions in our face, and they give clear indication what we're thinking and feeling. So this little device will know quite accurately whether this child can or cannot do something. So they'll be a 24/7 teacher, and they'll be giving them support all the time. So I think we're going to see a fair bit of that. That actually fits in with the way that we can develop algorithmic maps of a child's learning. So depending on how you look at the concept of privacy, we can determine quite accurately what a child can and cannot do. And then all of the technology comes drawing together to create learning experiences for them that actually deliver on that. And we can already do that to some degree. So it's like a massive algorithm on every child. That's where I see one of the big benefits of AI, though, again, some people question the validity of, some device like that knowing everything about the child. A fair point as well. So, yes, big moves in terms of the way we learn, partly because of AR and VR as well. There are so many experiences we can now do in those alternative worlds, and they can be much faster and safer. Much easier to crash a plane in AR than it is in real life. And then you can learn from that experience and move forward. And, they're now very powerful systems. They're so realistic that sometimes you almost can't tell the difference.
Yeah, even as an adult, when you put on the VR glasses, it does take you, it's almost quite disorientating going into that world. But getting back to the AI and the robotics, and it's unlikely to be happening with my children, but one of my concerns would be empathy, which was one of the capabilities that you mentioned at the start. Can a robot provide that empathy to a child?
It's a beautiful question. For the next couple of decades, at an artificial level, they can. One of the best-known robots on the planet is Pepper. If you wanted to know more about robots, you'd look up Pepper. Pepper is voice-activated and can detect your voice and respond accordingly. He, it, she can also see your face, as I mentioned before, and determine how you're feeling. You can already buy Peppers in some parts of the world, and they actually can do a lot of things to help you. Now, Pepper has a big panel on its chest, and that panel displays all sorts of beautiful images like hearts beating. And so Pepper artificially determines if you're feeling sad, and then Pepper can respond accordingly, with his AI, and he can then try and cheer you up. So for 20 years or so, we're going to see more of this. Eventually, though, we're going to get to an interesting stage where we will get into the iRobot territory, and the robots, to some degree, will start to become, very impressive with that empathy, perhaps even better than us in some ways, which is a bit intriguing. I also think there's going to be an increase in the attitude of empathy around the world, partly because of all this, because we're going to learn how to actually pay respect to other people and listen to them and actually work with them. Because while a minority of people want to live in this artificial world, like Second Life or the equivalent, a lot of people don't. And we've discovered that this year in terms of the coronavirus. People want to be with other people. They love enjoying that time with them and empathizing with them. We try and teach kids about this empathy, and I think that's going to keep coming through, partly because a lot of the employment that is on the rise is to do with human-centered work. It's where people actually help other people, because robots yet still can't work really well at being teachers and nurses and social workers and salespeople and so on.
Yeah, definitely. And touch as well. So when a child, for example, is upset and needs calming down, a robot can't give them that touch for that comfort.
Well,
do you know what I mean?
I certainly do. As yet, it can't easily do it, though. We're already at the point where you can give someone a hug in another part of the world. So if they're in Sweden and you put your arms around wearing the AR glasses and you see the person there, you put your arms around where you perceive you can see them, and the gloves you're wearing then push in on that image. And at the other end, the clothing they're wearing or the suit they're wearing actually feels the pressure of those fingers coming in on them. So we can actually duplicate most of those experiences of being human in different ways, which raises some interesting issues over the next 40 years, especially when it comes to, shall we say, personal relationships with people. So we're going to have to really learn how to be with real human beings and just treat the technology as a wonderful servant but a lousy master.
And that's incredible, being able to hug on the other side of the world. So is that technology there now?
Yes.
You can do that?
I can't remember the actual title for it, though it definitely exists, because there are all sorts of little sensors in the gloves that you're wearing so that when you push in, they actually respond accordingly on the other side of the world with that set of gloves or the suit. Interesting times, Nicola.
Yeah, I mean, that for me has a real personal aspect as well. I was supposed to go back to the UK this July to my sister's wedding. And I don't know when the next time I'll be able to go to the UK and see my parents or hug my friends. And that's something that you really, really miss in these really difficult times. So I could almost feel that as you were saying it.
Yep.
Yeah, that's really awesome. And Tony, I read an article that you shared, and this is really intriguing and slightly scary as well, that there's a 50% chance that we live in a computer simulation. Tell me a bit more about that concept.
I don't necessarily agree on the 50%, though there is conjecture that it is possible. So one of those conjectures is that some very advanced civilization, perhaps 3,000 years ago, decided to engage in a very large-scale planetary experiment, and so they set us all up so that we'd go through this simulation. And now we're part of it all. And in fact, this thing is so good that we can't even tell that we're not in it at all. Now, is it possible? Well, according to most people, possibly not. Though, there are exponentialities in the way that things change so rapidly. And I'd say within, say, 1,000 years, we will have the technology on this planet to be able to set that up on Mars or some distant Alpha Centauri planet. And it's because of those exponentialities that I'm not just dismissing it totally out of hand. So, for example, this being the year 2020, I'd say within 50 years, we're going to go into post-human states of being. That's only 50 years away. So your daughters will actually see this. Now, the early version of that is when you just get videoed. So that's already you could die, but the video still, remains. And so people can see you. Eventually, we're going to have situations medically where like someone's brain can actually be removed and then put into an artificial entity. So you could go on living. Now, that possibly will start happening in the early 22nd century. So you see, it's not that that simulation is impossible. It's just worth keeping in mind that we have got the most amazing exponentialities where we're going to see more change in this next 30 years than probably we've seen in most of human civilization. So we just need to keep that in mind when it comes to things like this. Though I'm just saying there are interesting times up ahead. And that's, again, why, your daughters need to be open to learning and opportunity because big times are coming. And I actually think often really exciting ones. So, we might wrap up with a comment on that one because I can't guarantee that.
Wow, that is really incredible. And actually, I'm glad you brought it the next 30 years. So that will be 2050. Tony, I want you to get out your crystal ball. What do you think the world's going to look like then in 2050?
I may as well toss a coin. Well, here's why. If someone said to me, where will the share market be next week? I pretty well haven't got a clue. That's 1 week away, let alone a year away, let alone 30 years away. So it's about the equivalent. Look, there are probably 3 quick ways of looking at whether you can predict the future or not. One is that you can't because it's chance. Like winning gold lotto. I don't know the numbers for this Saturday night either. So chance is one part of it. The second is that sometimes we can predict accurately what's going to happen up ahead. So I know, for example, that there is going to be a major solar eclipse. So I think it's on May the 20th in the year 2050.
Oh, wow. That's my daughter's birthday.
Well, that's pretty cool. Just add 30 onto what she is now and hey, presto.
Yeah.
I'm, in fact, laughing about the synchronicity of me mentioning that when it's her birthday that day.
Yeah, she'll be 45 that day.
Oh, that's pretty cool. Well, the thing is we can predict some things, but not all. So, we can predict accurately what age will be at a certain time, assuming, of course, we stay alive. There's a third way of looking at the future, and this is the one that fascinates me the most, and it's the one where we call it choice. And too many people denigrate this, saying it's too flimsy and new age mumbo jumbo. Choice is where we say, how do we want people to be in Australia? What sort of social life do we want to have in 5 years from now? And we imagine that and we come up with clear design principles in terms of how that could happen. Then we backward map to now and we start to put it into place steadily. Now, before people say, well, that's just ridiculous, I say, well, most of you live your life that way. If you want to get fit and healthy, you deem that by the end of next year, you're going to be super fit and healthy, losing weight or whatever. and then you steadily put it into place. So that's you predicting your future and having the choice to put it into place. We just need to know how to now do that at the macro level. And that's why it's so important to realize that you must not let the future disempower you totally, thinking that it's only a crystal ball where you can just predict it. Otherwise, you're giving the power over to other people to do it to you. We need to actually be on board ourselves. And in fact, that's why I'm into the word everyone, quite bluntly, because people go, when's everyone going to do something about it? And I go, absolutely, because it's two words. It's every one of us. So we look at the work we do each day and the way we contribute in social, community and our families, and we keep thinking, what's the sort of vision we want for where we want things to be up ahead? And as we are wrapping up here, Nicola, that's what a parent does. They actually think about the amazing young people they can bring forth into the world, at least by the end of their teenage years, and they steadily just put it into place. They chip away. They chip away slowly and steadily. And that's the power of human civilization, the way it can actually create the most wonderful things for us.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you, Tony. And thank you. It's always such a delight talking to you. You're so interesting, and have that positivity, realist positivity and optimism. So thank you for sharing your insights and advice. Is there anything else that you'd like to share?
I probably can just say that it comes down to each one of us working with other people to actually make this sort of thing happen. So whatever amazing project you've got in your mind that you could actually put into place somewhere up ahead, start working on how you can do it and steadily put it into place. You owe it to the world, and the world wants it from you.
Perfect. That's brilliant. Thank you, Tony.
Thank you, Nicola. Delighted to talk with you.
Thank you. I hope that you enjoyed this episode. Please remember to subscribe, rate, and review. If you're looking for career advice, your next career opportunity, or to grow your tech team, then please call me, Nicola Steel, on 0499 773 546, or go to our website, jjptalent.com.au. The Don't Just Survive, Thrive podcast is part of the Spotlight series, which includes the YouTube channel, Spotlight on Software Development. If you want more insights into the software industry, particularly tech startups, then subscribe to the Spotlight on Software Development YouTube channel. Thank you for listening. Until next time.